Exciting. Hi, everybody. So as you can tell, I'm not Jocelyn. She's running a little bit late, but you are. If you can see me and hear me, you are at the right place. So please hang in there, and we'll be back in a bit. Okay. Happy Hump Day, everybody, and it's really great to be standing up here without an agenda. I am, as you know, Nick, and I'm wearing almost the exact same outfit I was wearing at Mozilla when I was on stage for the Friday plenary. Let me see, what else can I talk about? So, yeah. Yeah, we can talk about, adolescent. I was 22 when I met Jocelyn, right? And so, but it is all about me. So let's talk about me. So yeah, I was 22, hardly an I don't think that counts as an adolescent. But I did realize that it's the year 2016, which is really insane, right? Like, there are people driving today that were born in the year 2000. Just think about that for a second, right? Like, it feels really futuristic, right? But I had this observation with Diane that, the physical world hasn't changed that much. The digital world has. But, in terms of architecture and civil engineering, a lot of the buildings that, there was a big leap between the year 1990 and 2000 where we really learned how to make big structural glass panels. And so if you look particularly in retail or commercial construction, you'll see that buildings that were built in 2000 look the same as buildings built today. You had, maybe Frank Gehry was doing some interesting things, but if I look at it's really hard now for me to date photographs taken in the, any time in the last 20 years. And Office Space is also, 17 years old now? So, again, this is an incredible time where things don't feel that different other than we're carrying little computers around. And I think Jocelyn has just arrived and is getting a Danish, so you can stop listening to my vamping. Oh, also, did you hear that Doctor Who is getting another showrunner? And Peter Capaldi is now going to leave the show. And I feel like he was a great actor, but didn't get the scripts that he deserved. I'm really hoping for a female doctor in the next iteration because we know that they can change. So it is also 2016, so it's about time.
I can also tell you more. Dr. Matt Smith, right?
Yeah.
The previous doctor is going to be playing Robert Mapplethorpe in a biopic.
Wow.
Yeah, that's going to be a change.
Yeah, so thanks. Liz is telling me that that Matt Smith is going to be Robert Mapplethorpe, and his photography is not exactly safe for work, but worth checking out when you're at home. Okay. Anyone else have any interesting tidbits that you'd like to broadcast around the world at this point? No? Okay, let me see what else I can talk about. Let me see. So, the X-Files reboot. Did anyone watch that? What did you think? It is amazing how she hasn't really aged, right? Like, yeah, and I think it might be clean living.
I'm live.
Oh, Jocelyn is here. So anyway, you can stop listening to me. You're here to hear someone else talk. I'm sure you were all enraptured by my talk. Anyway, as you saw in the email, Jocelyn and I go way back. I was a fresh-faced 22-year-old when I first met her, and I think we went to lunch for a lunch interview. And we have both had interesting careers. I really can't believe that I'm where I am, and she's had a really interesting set of gigs as well. And so, most recently she was the director of engineering at Facebook. She was a VP at VMware. She's done really interesting leading engineering teams. She's did you write the Task Reaper at Facebook?
Did.
Yeah, so she is a
project.
Yeah, so at boot camp at Facebook, she wrote a software, right, to help deal with tasks in the bug system. And so she's not just an executive; she also writes code, and really great role model for anyone who wants to see where they can go. And so, without further ado, it's a great pleasure to introduce Jocelyn Goldfein.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you. So it's funny that Nick harkens back to his internship at Trilogy. Make sure I've got this in the right place. Because actually being here kind of brings me back to my first summer internship. I'm pretty sure I had the distinction of being Netscape's very first summer intern in 1995. There was not a formal internship program until '96, But Bob Jung decided to go rogue and post his own internship listing in '95 and hired me. So Netscape was the beginning of working for many, many different companies. I interned twice at Netscape in '95 and '96. After college, I went to work for an enterprise company in Texas where I met Nick, called Trilogy, which, I don't know if Nick has dwelt on what Trilogy did, but let's say we sold very high dollar enterprise software deals to Fortune 500 companies like IBM or Compaq or Ford. And after some years at Trilogy, I went in with a couple of my Trilogy coworkers and co-founded a startup in 2001, which was in some ways a very bad time to start a company, in some ways a good time. And although this was before the term SaaS, we were part of the earliest wave of SaaS companies. At the time, we called ourselves an MSP. So we were hosting software for enterprise customers. And then I headed back to Silicon Valley, and I got to join VMware very, very early, when it was about 300 people. And after 7 years at VMware, in which time it had grown from 300 to, I want to say, north of 10,000 people and $2 billion in revenue, I decided that I had it with big companies, and I wanted to leave and join a startup, and I instead tripped and fell and joined Facebook instead. This was in 2010. I spent 4 years at Facebook, mostly working on the product side, shipping newsfeed and photos, and spent my last year and a half really trying to help Facebook dig out of the hole we dug on mobile. And since summer of 2014, I have been angel investing and solo. So I tell you all this not to kind of ramble about my background, but to give you an idea of the different kinds of movies I've seen when it comes to shipping software. I've worked at the 3-person company to the 10,000-person behemoth. I've worked at companies that sold software for literally, we did $50 million contracts at Trilogy, all the way down to let's call it ad-supported rather than free at Facebook. And so having seen sort of every walk of life when it comes to developing software, I now consider myself an expert, and as I've titled my talk, I'm here to tell you the right way to build software. I wish I could. I wish that I had found one single method, one methodology, one ship process that would work in all environments and under all conditions, and I didn't. There's absolutely some truisms, right? Like you want to fix bugs early, you want to integrate often, beta tests rock, but there is no sort of one consistent methodology that works for everything all the time. The way that the way that VMware shipped software would have been disastrous at Facebook, Facebook would have been produced, infinitely more slowly and less successfully. The way that Facebook shipped software wouldn't have produced VMware at all. So it's really because there's not a right and wrong way to ship. There's just a set of trade-offs. There's just what you optimize for. How many of you have worked with or have been that engineering manager who says, features, quality, date, pick 2? Anybody guilty? I'm guilty. Oh, no, all right, a little. Okay. All right, so it's true, all right? It's a cliche because it's kind of true. Like any of these things that you fix come out of some other bucket. There's a finite amount of engineering capacity. When you think you've found something that breaks the rules, like it turns out something else is giving. It's actually not a 3-dimensional trade-off space. It's an n-dimensional trade-off space. I got to Facebook, and they seemed like they were getting features and quality and speed. And I'm like, what have you done? Have you changed the rules of physics? Have you made engineering capacity just greater? And they hadn't changed the rules of physics, but what they had was a process that threw predictability out the window. So that actually significantly improved engineering throughput, but at the cost of knowing when anything would ship or what it was. And that was fine for their business. It wouldn't have worked at VMware. And so it's important when you sit down to think about, well, how should I ship? To think about, well, what the heck are you optimizing for? Are you trying to maximize engineering throughput? Are you trying to maximize things shipping on time? It turns out those two are at odds. That is a classic time-space trade-off. And we're familiar with lots of classic, I've listed some classic trade-offs to sort of put you in the mindset of either or. The more of your cake you eat, the less of it you have. That's sort of the tension. And down here at the bottom, I think sort of two of the classic ways that people think about shipping software, either with a lot of upfront planning and figuring out all the details, and then everything runs very smoothly because you've anticipated and given yourself appropriate amounts of slope time, really contrasts with sort of the spirit of very continuous iteration, constant pivoting, constant change, both of which can work, both of which can deliver software well, but which optimize for kind of different things. And so the question is, like, which of those should you choose? And it's not an idle question, because we have these battles all the day. Maybe not in the macro. We sort of don't sit down with a blank sheet of paper and say, I wonder how we should ship software this month. But these debates rage, in the micro all the time over any given piece of decision making. Should we have UI freezes? How long should they be? Should we demand specs? When should we kick features out of the release if they have missed a date? Right? Like these conversations happen all the time. And my strong belief is that you've got to go. If you answer those questions sort of organically or the best way it seems at the time, you will sort of incrementally evolve into something in a very Darwinian manner. But you can speed up that process and make it less painful if you sort of take a step back and say, well, form should follow function. And I'm showing you a picture of the Guggenheim Museum, which is considered, sort of one of the best examples of the architectural principle of form following function. That the way things are built, the way they're shaped, should follow what you want to accomplish with them. And I believe that that's true in release process as well. That we should pick the release process not based on sort of how we like it, but how well it suits our circumstances, our capabilities, and our environment. And so I think there are two aspects of your environment. I mean, VMware and Facebook obviously are sort of really different companies who ship software in really different ways. And it made me reflect on what was different about those two companies that made the appropriate ship methodology so different. And I landed on two things which I think kind of dominated, and would not say there aren't other things. But one of them is very much your technology stack and your deployment model. And yes, maybe those are different things, but I'm going to conflate them into one thing. And I think that this really dominates sort of what you're able to do. And if you think about technology stack as a spectrum with sort of, your web app at the top of the food chain, and then as you move lower in the stack, you're building native apps on mobile, maybe on desktop, maybe you're building operating systems at the back. Like, I guess the spectrum goes all the way to hardware, but I've never seen that, so I'm going to stop here. You can draw truisms about the stack, right? Like, if you live high on the food chain, you're going to be able to reuse a lot of frameworks, and you're going to get features developed very, very quickly. On the other hand, if you live lower in the stack, there's less between you and the middle, fewer layers of abstraction between you and the middle. You can deliver high-performance apps better. Or you are more likely to be able to build really high-reliability apps because you very much control your destiny. At the same time, your technology stack usually goes hand in hand with how you deploy. And this, I think, is truly one of the biggest differences. And that is, if you're writing a web app or a cloud service, your software runs on hardware that you control. It runs in an environment that you control with an operating system, hardware, configuration that you control. You don't have to test in a million different environments. It works on your own device. But most of all, you can change it whenever you want to. Facebook literally had 2 release vehicles a day. Well, 9 a week. So once a day on Tuesdays, twice a day, Monday through Friday. And so if you want to ship new code on Facebook, you could do it as soon as you wanted to. And VMware probably shipped once every 2 years for a major release, maybe 6 months for patches. And that's because, it had to burn a CD and send it to customers, and customers had to sort of soak it and decide they wanted to install it on their hardware in their operating system, in their data center. So, and I think that your deployment model, whether you're running on hardware you control or hardware somebody else controls, is kind of an immense, bifurcation of how you think about releasing, because it changes whether the cost of a release is cheap or expensive. Both because you get to do it when you want to, when it's your hardware, and because you control the environment you're deploying into. All right, so your technology stack, your deployment model, that kind of defines what capabilities you have, what's easy for you, what's hard for you. But what about what's important to you, what you value? And I think that goes to what is the mission of your institution, of your organization, of your company. And I think a lot of the times we're dealing with, all the companies I've worked for have been for-profits, and a good proxy for thinking about the mission or the value they create in the world is, well, how do they make money? And I think this, too, is a spectrum. They can go all the way from sort of Trilogy-esque $50 million contracts on the left. You can be VMware and have actually very packaged, relatively low price points for enterprises. You can start selling to consumers, maybe at hundreds of dollars, or maybe you're Candy Crush and you get $15 a year out of me. Maybe you're ad-supported like Facebook, or totally free as in beer like Mozilla. And on that spectrum, it actually sort of, I think, affects, it is a good rule of thumb for thinking about what your community of users want and need from you. If an enterprise has paid you tens of millions of dollars, it is because you are mission critical. It is because they are running their business on you and they can't do it without you. And so what they need most of all from you is not actually features, it is predictability and reliability. It is you not going down because when you're down, their data center is down, or when your CRM is down, their salespeople are unable to book revenue. At the same time, so you might think, oh, so it gets easier as you go towards the right. It gets easier as software becomes less expensive. Kind of. I think that consumers can absolutely be more forgiving. I think Twitter is maybe troubled today, but we would all consider Twitter a very successful business, and yet it was infamous for the fail whale in the early days of its existence, right? Like they couldn't keep their service stood up. That was not fatal, because that would have been fatal in an enterprise software company. In a consumer-free service, well, I can go away and come back to Twitter an hour later, and I may gripe about it, but if it's valuable enough to me, I'll stick. And so when you're dealing with software where people pay less money, have more alternatives, are there because they enjoy it or they want it rather than because they need it, on the one hand, they can have lower expectations about getting to demand features or reliable uptime. But you have a flip side of higher expectations, which is if they're only there because they want to be there, then they have to want to be there, which tends to mean UX needs to be great. There needs to be a lot of delight for users. It tends to mean it really needs to do what people want it to do. And so predictability of a new feature arriving may not be that important, but a steady stream of new features that get people excited and engaged maybe is important. I want to acknowledge that other business models do exist, besides charging money for software or giving away for free. There's platform plays, there's e-commerce. But I think that sort of, by and large, this rule of thumb of, do people need your software or do they have to want your software, I think, again, sort of tilts how you think about the cost of a release and the cost of a mistake. I think there was a question over here. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think the perception is generally what you described, but I think the reality is closer to people really do depend on their browser for mission critical kinds of things.
Yeah.
They're paying their bank account.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're in this tough world where lots of our competitors, lots of the people that we're comparing against, the Twitters of the world, hit reload and it'll work.
Mm-hmm.
If your browser can't start,
Yeah.
getting reload.
Yeah.
And the other part of it,
I'm going to repeat it.
and the other part of it is it's a matter of what viable choices are available to people. And there we have Chrome and lots of choices now.
Oh, you're anticipating my answer.
Created that environment, and
Yes.
and now and I think one thing that you can really encourage us to do is like really pound on this question hard and get uniform thinking about it across the whole organization.
Yeah. So let me just repeat a little bit, because I think probably the folks who are remote didn't catch the opening part of it, which is this is an important question. At Mozilla, we commonly think, well, consumer software, sort of low accountability, but a browser, unlike Twitter, really needs to work. It is mission critical, even though it's free. So it sort of violates a little bit of the truism in my talk. And I think that is true. I think browsers are absolutely mission critical, and I have thought so since I was a college freshman using Mosaic. So I knew it before anybody, not before everybody, but before a lot of people. I think that, and the sort of second part of your comment was, but we also live in this world where there's lots of other browsers and lots of other competition. And I think that's actually sort of the key way in which, although the browser is mission critical, Firefox has many alternatives. I was thinking about this slide because I've given this talk many times, but I was thinking about this talk and what it would mean at Mozilla. And of course, you guys know Mozilla much better than me, but I was thinking about this question, which is, gosh, even though Mozilla is way on the right, it really is mission critical. And I thought, but the way in which it is, frankly, replaceable is that all our devices come with another browser. There is, by definition, every user of Firefox has access to other browsers, probably multiple other browsers, but there are certainly some baked in. And so I think it still has that quality that you may have the worst of both worlds. It still has that quality that people need to use Firefox. They need to embrace it and choose it. It's not a standard. It's not forced on them. If you work for a company and this is the expense filing system, like, it doesn't matter if the UI sucks. That's the expense filing system of your company, right? Like, you have to choose to use consumer software. And I think that's true with Firefox too. It has to delight me, or I'm going to use something else, right? The default position is something that doesn't require me to go explicitly download. But I think in that same way, the browser is mission critical, and so if it doesn't work, that's like a moment that's really infuriating. And so you may have the high expectations of UX, of delight, and also have the high expectations of reliability and predictability. So, and those are things that should shape how you think about your tolerance for error. There's another way in which you're very unlike Twitter, though, and you sort of close by saying, and we're really not like Twitter. I think it's not, though, what really makes you unlike Twitter, it's not just that you are mission critical and Twitter isn't, because in truth, if Firefox fails, I do have an alternative, which is I'll just fire up Safari and try something else, right? But so I'm not stopped, I'm not dead in the water. But the way in which you are, I think, most unlike Twitter is that Twitter is a web app. They deploy on their own servers. You reload your browser and it works because they had a chance to fix the bug in the last 5 minutes, and or to more likely onboard more server capacity, right? Whereas, if something's wrong with Mozilla where it can't start and a reboot doesn't help, and there truly is a bug, I have to download the next update, right?
There's one more interesting point too. We get blamed for
website
Facebook
bugs.
problems.
Yes.
We get blamed for Twitter
sure.
problems.
Yes. Yes.
And so
Yes.
a lot of their unreliability gets deferred to us, and like we really don't have complete control over that. We have some degree of control.
So if I had to put you on this spectrum, like maybe nominally you're a desktop app, but I think you're really in some way, it's true. A browser is, give Bill Gates some credit. The browser really kind of is the operating system, right? It is the platform on which the apps are built. And so you are a lot more like an operating system in that way. And so that will come into play. So in the next couple slides. So I don't promise that I have all the answers, but I think that I'm going to give you a useful framework to have those conversations. So I want to pause because I'm an engineer and I anticipate all possible objections to what I have to say or contributions. I want to stop and explicitly acknowledge that your technology, your deployment model, your mission or your business model, they are not the only inputs to your priorities and your capabilities, okay? How big the competitive threats are, whether you are trying to really grow your user base or whether you're trying to profit from the users you have. Like, these other things exist and they might tilt you one direction or the other, but I'm going to hand wave them. Certainly, I'm usually giving this talk to startups, and I think certainly for startups, none of those things matter as much. I think in your case, maybe the existence of competition matters, but like the prevalence, I should say, of competition matters a lot. But I'm going to hand wave those in this talk. I'm only going to talk about these two axes. So now that I've got two axes, I'm going to do the thing that we do with two axes, and I'm going to throw them together and make a plane. And just to sort of usefully situate what I've done, like these are all the companies I've worked for placed spatially on those two axes. And you can see that I have minimized reuse in my career, shall we say, or maybe maximized learning by wandering through all four quadrants in my time in somewhat of a random order. I didn't do this on purpose. But what I think is noticeable about this is that sort of having made my way around, I can say something about how life is different in each of these four quadrants. And I do think that the quadrants define interesting spaces. Because if you think about a world in which you're delivering a web app like Facebook, and your software is free, so user expectations about glitches are, I click reload, it's back, it's fine. Or if Facebook is down for an hour, like I'm pissy, but like I don't leave Facebook. I come back an hour later and it works. And I think in that world you can have a philosophy that amounts to something like move fast and break things. In the Mozilla Netscape quadrant, I would put Oculus here. I could put a lot of entertainment software here. We actually have to download it. We actually have to take an update when there's a bug fix. But we still have to, it's still inexpensive, or it's still something that I opt to use rather than being forced to use or need to use. And I think user delight becomes the centric philosophy, if I may grossly stereotype. in VMware's world, we were determined to provide reliability at all costs. Our customers really depended on us, and we drove their business. And in the SaaS world, and my startup you don't know about, but think of Salesforce, okay? Or think of a CRM tool, right? Like the pitch there to customers is, this is hassle-free. You don't have to manage it. And what this Axis does is not just give you slogans to think about or values to think about. Like, one of the most important values that I think is usefully shaped by these two axes is your appetite for risk. And a lot of people think that appetite for risk is like a personality trait, and maybe Facebook has much more appetite for risk than VMware because of the founders, and Mark Zuckerberg is just much more of a daredevil than Diane Greene. And I just don't think that's true. I think it's about the business that you're in and the cost of a mistake. And if you think about a world in which a given bug has cost X, there's some severity of that bug, all right? But relative to the same severity of bug, the cost of that bug getting to your users is very different in the different quadrants. I would say in a world where, and that cost comes from two components. It comes from what does it cost you to fix it? What is the time and effort it takes you to fix it? And then truly, though, it's dominated by what is the pain that causes your users in the meantime, in the time that they're waiting for a fix. And so in the upper right, you have maximum chance to fix it quickly, because as soon as if I'm sitting at Facebook, I have logging and debugging statements, shipped, within minutes, and I'm getting input quickly, and I'm diagnosing the problem quickly, and I'm shipping I have a second release vehicle that day, or if need be, I can even, roll a hotfix vehicle if the bug is severe enough, all right? So speed of fixing it is maximized on the right-hand side of this, all right? And then how bad is my mistake for my users? How much did I hurt my community? And, in a world where I can't load my news feed and I have to come back an hour later to load my news feed, it's just not life-ending, right? It's not going to make me leave the Facebook. It might if it happened every day all the time, but it's not going to sort of have long-term lasting pain to me as a member of Facebook's user community. So I'm going to call the impact of a bug on the top right, 1x. And x can still be large, right? Like a privacy bug on Facebook is pretty grim. We had a terrible bug with the photo uploader, which probably cost us 10% of total photo volume for a 4-month period, okay? That's like a pretty staggering, significant bug. So X can be large, but relative to other companies with a similar severity bug, Facebook's cost was 1x, okay? If you move left, all right, now all of a sudden, debugging is harder because you can't just put out some log statements and you can't just sort of see large data streams about exactly which users are encountering this error. And it takes time. And even once you do have a fix, you have to actually get an update out there, and the update has to reach all your users, which is very, very difficult. Easier on mobile, harder on desktop. So let's say that, just ballpark, the cost of a similarly severe bug is an order of magnitude higher when you're building native software. Okay. Well, and now let's go down. And let's say, okay, we're not Facebook, we're Salesforce. All right? And the cost of a bug, we are still able to debug and to fix very, very quickly, but all of a sudden we're interrupting mission-critical software instead of, entertainment or, sort of social activities. And in that world where I can't book revenue, I can't pay employees, I can't communicate, an outage is also much more severe, even if it's quick to fix. All right, so the pain to the customer is worse going left, the severity, the time to fix it is worse going down, and guess what? These things multiply rather than add. So really, shed a tear for poor VMware down here on the bottom left, where the cost of a mistake is 2 orders of magnitude more than in the upper right. And so I think that really should shape a lot of how you think about your ship process, because a lot of the trade-offs and choices that we make in this process is all about how much risk we're prepared to accept and how much safety we require. And so I think not because people are sort of thoughtful about this and nobody sort of sits down and says, well, I charge an average price point of $500, which puts me about here on this axis, and my deployment model is mobile. And so, nobody, and so therefore I should have this release process. I think everybody organically evolves in a very Darwinian way, but I think what you find is if you go study companies in each of these 4 quadrants, they kind of evolve towards the same rough kinds of release process that does maximize for what they're good at, what comes easy to them, for whether their releases are expensive or cheap, right? And they end up in this kind of rough world if they're smart, if they're actually good at optimizing for their best interests, right? So, in free web land, you can have fast and short cycles. You're centric on metrics and what's the impact of what you're shipping and how good is the UX. I think on the top left, anytime the cost of a release is high, you have longer cycles by definition. You got to get more into each one, and you got to make them really, really good. You've got to make the quality high because it's hard to fix mistakes. And in a consumer world, that means design quality too, right? And then, similarly, you go enterprise, the cycles are long, you're reliability-centric, you're customer-centric more than you are design-centric. It's the fewer customers you have, the more you can tailor to their particular needs. The more customers you have, the more you have to reason about them in volume. And I think that on the sort of enterprise, you kind of, on the one hand, you have the capacity, releases are very cheap, but on the other hand, your customers don't actually like your software to change all the time, so you sort of end up compromising on medium cycles and again, being very customer-centric. And so those are sort of loosely where people end up, and nobody needs this lecture to kind of find their way there. I think if you sort of run around the valley, people figure this out on their own. So what's the point of this talk? And it is this that we run into trouble because nobody stays parked in one quadrant. If your business is successful, you expand your business lines, say you're Microsoft and you start out building, Microsoft, you start out in the bottom left building operating systems and office applications for business workers. All of a sudden you find yourself in the top left because the business worker buys a PC to have a PC at home. All of a sudden, you find that the world has changed and that, the web is now a thing and you actually have to compete on that ground as opposed to pretend it doesn't exist. And maybe you find yourselves in a war with a search giant and you need to try to build a search engine here in the top right. Okay? And so those are actually good problems to have because, if you don't grow, then you're probably not headed in a good direction. Even for startups, pivots happen, right? Like you start out thinking that you're productivity software for consumers, and you find out that that's a better business, selling to companies. So you move from the top to the bottom. Maybe you're Facebook, and you're born in the top right, and then you find out that the world changes, and people want you on mobile. And user and UX expectations of consumers cannot be met with the mobile web, and now you find yourself in the top left. And so that's going to happen. And the trouble is that, as engineers, we are capable of carrying out holy war over tab widths, all right? And so release process, ship methodology is something that we get ideological about. We get religious about. We decide that we've found the one true way. Because that Darwinian way of finding a release process in response to what comes easily and what works and what doesn't work for you leads you to believe that you've discovered natural law. And, if it is a natural law, I want to say it's something like the law of gravity where it's different on every planet. And the trouble is people don't realize when they've changed their planet. They try to apply their natural law. They have a hammer. They see things as nails. How many more metaphors can I crank in? And it becomes embedded in your culture. And so when those cultures clash, you get culture war. And I think that's very problematic. It's problematic for actually achieving your mission. It's problematic for having actually the right ship process for what you're trying to do, actually optimizing those trade-offs for what your values are. And by the way, it's a really sucky life experience to live through one of these, right? Like it's one of the most painful, it's the kind of thing that makes us quit jobs and change companies. And I think that I'll return to Microsoft as an example for a second. I've never worked there. What I have done is interview tons of engineers coming out of the Bing team looking for jobs elsewhere. And what I would say from all those conversations with people from Bing is that I don't think Bing ever really capitalized on the advantages of being in the upper right. They never had a culture, an engineering culture, that made the most of what you could do on the web. And I don't think that's because they were sort of foolish or wrong. I think it was because it was so deeply embedded in Microsoft's DNA that the definition of a good engineer is one who predicts what they can do and then does it. One who estimates and hits their estimates. One who says they'll do something and then delivers. That predictability was enshrined as a value. And so they were just unable to jettison it. And the big engineering throughput wins open up when you jettison predictability. And so, other companies competing with Microsoft on the web could just go faster and deliver higher quality products with higher throughput because they were able to let go of predictability. And I think, Facebook, because it was born in the era of the web, was able to start with that mindset from the get-go. Otherwise, it's very hard to adopt. And so it's quite I think, a challenge. And I think maybe the most extreme version of it that I've seen in person was at Facebook. So Facebook started in the web. It was born after the era of the web. They never had desktop DNA to begin with. They started they sort of are the ultimate expressiveness of this kind of continuous iteration. The way you develop a product at Facebook is you have a hypothesis, you build a prototype, you actually ship it, maybe only internally, and you dog food it. Maybe you put it in front of some select users outside. People react, respond to it. You incorporate that feedback. You turn the crank a few more times. You decide this is a bad design direction. You start over, and you turn the crank. So the nature of the development process, of the design process, is intrinsically iterative. And the same is true for debugging, right? Like if you get a bad bug report, the first thing you do is push a log statement to production so you can figure out what's going on, right? Like you don't sort of sit there in the debugger beating your head against the wall when you could just go get the data you need. And so the move to mobile was extremely hard for Facebook. I mean, that's obvious externally if you've lived through the last 5 years. But why? Why was it so hard, right? I mean, it's not because Objective-C and Java are really complicated languages compared to PHP. They're all 90% the same. And it's not that the iOS and Android frameworks were that different. It was exactly this engineering culture and philosophy of how you ship was what made it hard. So once Facebook sort of swallowed the pill that mobile web was not going to be successful, we built a big team that was experienced building from the outside, that was experienced building native apps. And we sprinted and we built native apps on iOS and Android that were good. And then we took a deep breath and wiped our brow and said, okay, these are good, but we don't want to be a company that has a mobile team. We want to be mobile first. We don't have a web team. We have a newsfeed team and a photos team and a messaging team. And we need those teams to be building for mobile, not some other mobile team. And so how are we going to accomplish that? And the mobile team, meanwhile, had built a release process for mobile that would probably look very familiar to you. It shipped a release every 4 weeks. It was actually a pipelined 8-week train, 4 weeks of development, branch cut, 4 weeks of stabilization, ship. And their view was you write a spec, you design, you code, you soak and test, and then you ship good software that you know is high quality. And when the product teams kind of encountered this release process, there was a ton of friction. To the product teams, it was like, well, okay, but if I, write my prototype and then I have to, wait from 5 to 8 weeks for it to ship because it's an 8-week-long release train, then I get some feedback. But by the time I'm a week in and I have good feedback and I've made changes, like the next branch cut's already gone, so I'm actually 7 weeks away from the next release. So what used to take me 2 weeks of iteration now takes me 16 weeks. If my 6-month release cycles are based on a certain number of 2-week iteration cycles, which is, say like some of the time actually is genuinely stabilizing, but say it's 4 months of 2-week iteration cycles is what it takes, right? So 16 cycles. Did I do that right? Nate? 8 cycles, right? Like some large number of cycles is like what it takes to get from like concept to, okay, I think I have the thing I want to harden and ship. Like, okay, now every one of those cycles, instead of being 2 weeks long, is 8 weeks long, or 16 weeks long because I missed the branch cut. So if I need to do 8 16-week cycles, my 6-month release just went to 3 years. Like, this is lunacy. Like, you people are idiots with your freezes. What you need to do is like take my changes after branch cut, right? So I can get them into the next release. And meanwhile, to the mobile team, it was sort of like, this is a lunatic way of shipping software. You should just design it and figure it out and then ship it. Like, what is this iteration that you speak of? Like, that's just abrogating your responsibility, your accountability to design a good product and QA it. And by the way, Facebook, why don't you have a QA team? You're idiots. And so it was, the trouble was not that these two teams disagreed about release process. And they didn't even just think the other party was sort of incompetent, although they did. It was actually that it came to the point that because these cultures were embraced not just as a matter of correct or incorrect, but really as a matter of right and wrong, that they almost regarded one another as a moral hazard to the integrity and future and culture of the company. And so the problems became very hard to unwind. And I found myself in the middle of this because as someone who had spent 7 years at VMware, but then 2 or 3 years in the Facebook product organization doing things the web ways, was actually one of the few people in the leadership team standing who had walked miles in both sets of shoes. And as crazy as it sounds, shipping a mobile app at Facebook, or shipping a mobile app anywhere, has more in common with the constraints of shipping a browser or an operating system than it does with shipping a website. And so I was sort of in a position to say, neither of you is evil, and neither of you is totally wrong, and neither of you is totally right. Mobile is different than web. It's a different deployment model. The product teams have to actually imbibe that. But likewise, Facebook is not Apple. We're not going to ship native software exactly the same way that every other company does. We may not have a QA team. We may find another way to get high quality before we ship, even though the cost of release is now higher. And so we have to kind of drink some Facebook Kool-Aid too and figure out the right way to ship native apps at Facebook. And I will say that I think that we did eventually get to a better place. And maybe telling that story is more useful than giving the meta frameworks. But I will say that what really helped was, there's the basic blocking and tackling of building trust, which amounts to sort of, okay, I recognize that you think the other group, quad group, is, bad, but aren't there individuals in that group that you respect and trust? Well, yes, all right, so can we get you to talk to them? And sort of breaking down stereotypes, and as you do. But I think one of the most helpful things that we did was really find the common ground that we did agree on. And what every one of these groups agreed on was we wanted to deliver the best possible software for our users. We cared, we valued the experience that people had with our software. And we might disagree about how best to get there, but we agreed on the destination. And I think that was rather critical. And then it was just sort of a long, slow process of really living for a while with the other person's perspective and understanding the merit in it, and sort of evolving to sort of a new third way that worked for both sides. I wouldn't say that it's 100%, but I would say we're in an infinitely better place. Facebook today is in an infinitely better place than it was in 2012, 2013. And some of that is because we were able to stop thinking of the release process as a matter of right and wrong, or there's one true way, and start thinking of it as a tool which serves our purposes. So if I want to leave you with some ideas to sort of take away from this, I almost don't feel that anybody I give this talk to is in the position of sort of starting from first principles to select a release process. So it's not like I think this is, you probably already have a release process, but maybe judge your release process based on whether you're optimizing for the software that you're shipping, not the software you used to ship, or not the environment, or not the customers or business model you used to have. I think that it's crucially important if you're growing or if you're changing, if you're pivoting, if you move through one of these quadrants, that you understand that that's culture change, not just technology change or business change, and that you address that up front. I think that it's also critical that you run around, you get advice from people all the time, right? You have this speaker series. People come in from all kinds of different companies and tell you their wisdom. And I would say, you've always got to take that advice, not so much with salt, but with recognizing what perspective they're coming from, right? If somebody from VMware comes in and tells you this is the right way to ship software, it's like, well, it's the right way to ship software if I'm optimizing for quality because it takes 2 years to ship something new. I want to sort of hedge this next one because I don't actually think that you want homogeneous DNA in your team. I actually think that hybrid vigor is what lets you survive changes in conditions, right? If Facebook had not hired me out of VMware, they would not have had me when they needed me when we had to pivot to mobile, which was a change we couldn't anticipate. So hiring people from all 4 quadrants and all different perspectives, I think, strengthens your organization. But if you are specifically hiring someone, and I'm frequently giving this talk to startups, if you are specifically hiring someone because they've seen the movie before and they'll come in and tell you what to do. I meet startups all the time who are looking for their first VP engineering hire, and they're like, yeah, we really want to get someone out of Google. And I look at them and I'm like, that's the upper right quadrant, and you're in the bottom right or the bottom left. And the person who comes in from Google knowing the right way to, and you're counting on them telling you the right way to do things, like, they have no frigging idea how you ought to be doing things. They may be very smart, they may be able to figure it out, but if you think you're hiring for expertise, if you think you need to hire someone who's specifically seen the movie before so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel, then maybe consider hiring someone from the same quadrant as you or as the product you're putting them on. And then the last thing I would say, given that you are hiring, hopefully, from all 4 quadrants, and you are bringing people in with all kinds of different perspectives about the right or wrong way to do software, you got to onboard really thoughtfully. You got to think about how you're introducing those people to your release process and how you introduce them to the why of it. And it's not just cult-like. It's not just we're Mozilla and this is the way Mozilla does things, right? Like, it's actually, what's most important here is that we delight our users because they have to choose to use our browser because they have many alternatives. Or what's most important to us is that we are ideologically pure because we depend on the open source community's contributions for our survival. Or whatever it may be, if you can connect the way you're doing things to the why you're doing them, then when the why changes, people are in a position to change their minds about what they're doing, as opposed to just feeling that things must be that way because that's the right thing to do. And so I hope some of those takeaways are useful, are applicable, and I am more than happy to entertain questions or conversation about this, because I would love to learn, how this applies here. Thank you.
I've got the microphone, so I get to talk first.
Uh-huh.
This was a great talk. It sets a great framework for evaluating what we need to do. And I would say that there's 2 things that we're trying to achieve. One is to create great software. And we have support from Chris Beard all the way through the organization to try and do that. But we really haven't defined exactly what that means. Mm-hmm. And the second part is we probably live in all of those quadrants. and we need to shift our thinking about what we're doing in each one of those now. And then the third part is escaping me now, but I'll think about it.
Well, I would say, so I talked a lot about sort of switching quadrants, to moving from one and change your ways to the others. But actually, the more common problem as you become established and you're not a startup anymore is really, the creation of this talk for startups is really showing, is you do end up spanning quadrants. Right? Like, the success condition is you grow large and you grow to serve many audiences. And so spanning quadrants is actually much harder even than shifting quadrants, because you really have 2 choices. One is we're going to have a consistent engineering culture that everyone shares, in which case we're going to consciously choose to optimize for one of the quadrants we're in, and it's going to be a little suboptimal for the other guys.
Right.
Or we decide that we can figure out how to tolerate different engineering culture in different teams, depending on the product you're shipping. Yeah. Not depending on the personality of the leader, most importantly, but depending on the product you're shipping and the end user you're serving. And I think it's quite difficult to embrace different culture under the same roof. But if you can pull it off, it's a superpower.
Right. Yeah, it's the other thing is that we really need to get to a point where losing a user has the highest priority. We have to stop losing users, and we have to stabilize that first, and then we have to figure out a way to get the curve moving in the other way. And we've spent a couple of years either stagnant or decline. Yep. And the combination between like creating great software and don't lose users needs to be kind of like that needs to drive every single decision that we make. Mm-hmm. If we had a criteria like that, I think people would start doing the right thing.
I think that's really right. I think that a huge part of getting this right is figuring out what you're optimizing for, right? I think the how ends up, like, we spend all our time debating the way we do things, but if we agreed on the why, what we were trying to do, and if you had universal agreement that growth was the goal, and I think it should be growth, by the way, not retention, or maybe engagement if you like that word, but I think that stemming the tide, like, if you focus on growing the numbers, that will intrinsically stem the tide, because it turns out that growth is a combination of adding new users and resurrecting old ones, right? Like, those 2 numbers sum into your growth number. And if you figure out what you want to measure and how you define success, and everybody in the organization is on board with moving towards that thing, then some of them will execute better or worse. We'll have some ideas that don't work out and some ideas that do. But the nice thing about growth is it's very measurable, right? It's not like, well, delightful UX is subjective. It's hard to measure. You don't know if you've achieved it or not. Different people may have different opinions on what's delightful. Did we grow our user base today is not subjective. It's knowable. You can try something, know if it worked, know if it didn't, stop doing it if it didn't work, do more of it if it did. And so those are actually, in some ways, I won't say the best kind of values, but they are the easiest kind to optimize for once you agree that you should.
We've got this cool microphone.
Throw it at my head, right? Hi. So awesome talk. This is actually the Firefox growth team, and this sounds like a growth playbook. So awesome, really, really awesome. We love this presentation. The question, I think it may be already answered, but just kind of wanted to say it again, is that you talked about like the cost of making a mistake as being kind of in two main quadrants or two main kind of areas. One is the cost of fixing the mistake, and then the cost of the pain for the end users.
I actually think there's, like, when it comes right down to it, I really think there's only one, and that's the pain you cause your users. And your cost to fix it is just like, it's in the noise. That's the cost of doing business. So I really think I think user pain comes in two dimensions. There's like, how bad is it for me, and then how long does it last?
Yep.
And so your cost to fix it is really a proxy for how long does the pain last for your users.
Yep. And we were thinking that same way too, and also kind of what Chaffman said too, that if a user stops using the product or service, they bring some intrinsic value to the organization, and you should know the value of those users that you're potentially churning in terms of when you're kind of estimating the relative cost to the mistake.
Yeah. I think one thing that is easier about optimizing for growth on the right is that you're shipping so frequently that you actually get pretty granular information about what's driving growth and what's not, right? Like you run an email campaigns actually I think work both ways. You run an email campaign, you can see that your numbers go up or not, right? But if you make product changes, and you see a response to those product changes, you can pretty much tie them directly to that change. When you batch up all your product changes across many features and dimensions and you send them out into the world, how often does Mozilla ship? Does Firefox ship? 6 weeks. All right, you send them out into the world every 6 weeks. Like, that's pretty frequent, but it's still like, oh, this next release is not, retaining users as well as we thought it might. Or, it's a little harder to pin down the culprit, right? Or it's a little harder, or the numbers were only a little up. Well, did that mean that one feature drove them way up and another feature, hurt them? And you don't have nearly as much granularity of insight into what change caused what user reaction. And so I do think that's a way in which it's sort of harder on the left. I don't know what to say about that. I think you can release more frequently on mobile than you can on desktop. I think you can put a lot of work into making the cost of an update lower by making them sort of transparent and behind the scenes and sort of not noticeable for users so that you can release faster. I mean, I would say actually releasing faster will help you a lot with growth. It's just that's my Facebook DNA speaking. And I think granularity of insight also, like just totally instrumenting everything that's going on in the browser, even though you're a desktop app, doesn't mean you can't instrument and log what people do and know what is causing them to do it. I think the more insight you can get, the more granularity of insight you can get into what moves the needle on growth, the more able you will be to actually serve your users better. To actually, right? Because ultimately, growth, I actually think it's easier to think about growth than it is, like if you think about revenue, it's sort of like, well, this is a very self-serving metric of, our company is being selfish, like revenue is actually the way in which we exploit our users by taking something away from them. I think growth is much more unimpeachable. Like growth, although people do try to impeach it, growth represents you're creating value in people's lives. And churn means you didn't. It means you created negative value or you didn't create enough positive value for them to spend the time with you. And we've all heard the term growth hacks, which make it sound like we're sort of trying to trick people into spending more time or come back. But I think human beings are smarter than that. Like I don't think we're tricked into using software we don't want to use over the long haul. Like you might get a temporary burst, but like all new features show novelty effects, right? But if there's not genuine value, if they don't bring people back, then they're not good features, and they're just not, right? Like that has to be the definition of goodness in a feature is that it made value in our users' lives. And so I think growth is quite a pure measure of did you create value in people's lives, and if the tree fell in the forest and if you made a great feature and no user uses it, your feature's not great.
So
or worse, they use it, and then for some reason, the people who use that feature are more likely to turn. Like, your feature's bad.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're trying to do is to sort of deepen our understanding of engagement, right? So it's not just users, which you can sort of buy, right? But also the hours spent in the browser, right? Like really like trying, because that helps reflect sort of deepening like relationship with the users and how we can be more vital to them. So we're evolving there.
And I can imagine, you can certainly have a debate about time spent. We did in Newsfeed. You know, there was definitely the perspective of, hey, is time spent really the right, like, you might well imagine that Newsfeed optimizes for time spent, and that sort of your more time spent browsing your Newsfeed means you're getting more value from it. And there was definitely a camp that believed in that, but there was also a camp that felt, you know, Newsfeed should be a utility. You should be providing usefulness to somebody, and if they got what they needed in a short amount of time, because you put the most important stuff first, you know, maybe less time spent actually means you served them better because you didn't take more of their time. It's a little thorny. I mean, I think that you can have those philosophical debates for a long time. I think ultimately you do need to make a decision, and people need to, even if they disagree, they need to commit to that decision. What we ended up deciding on Newsfeed was, and this is varied at many points in time. At a certain point in time, at a point in that discussion, we remained more focused on other metrics, actually, on things like clicks and likes and comments and friendships created at sort of like measurable outputs of time spent in the newsfeed, rather than the time spent itself. So we kept track of time spent, but it turned out that the things that made those other numbers go up did make time spent go up. So, you know, I think in the browser, I would hope it's not that controversial that more time spent in the browser probably means you're providing that you're good, but like, do you have the same debate? Do people sort of say if people have to spend more time, we're being less useful?
I think we're starting that debate because this has come up. But I mean, it goes. Firefox 1.0 had this amazing feature called RSS feeds, and you could put those into bookmarks. And we saw users go and open up a single page for every one of the 10 news sites that they wanted to look at every morning, and we saw a way for them to push the button, one button, and get all of those same pages opened up into tabs automatically. And that reduced their time online. It made them more efficient. And that's one of the main features that drove adoption of Firefox 1.0. So like we have examples of, like it's not only these metrics, but it's being able to explain what the value or that we're adding or detracting means. And being able to understand that and all be convinced of it.
I mean,
just really quickly, we have a couple questions on IRC we really need to get.
Let's do this.
So the first one.
Fine, but you guys are in the context.
So first was, what did the Quas Quadrant process at Facebook look like?
The what?
Quas Quadrant, like in terms
Quas
of.
Quadrant. Well, I mean, these quadrants are sort of my invention, and I sort of talked about them individually with people, but I wouldn't say that the quadrant quadrant's not a vocabulary word you'd find in the idioms at Facebook. So do you mean how did teams collaborate who are working on the mobile app versus the web, maybe? Like that's crossing a quadrant?
I'm just reading off the thing, so I don't we'll see if...
maybe the...
Like how did you resolve, like a little bit more detail on how that conversation...
Well, maybe they can clarify on IRC while I'm tap dancing.
Yeah, we'll move to the next one, and then if we get an update from IRC, we'll give you more context.
Okay.
So how do R&D projects fit in this sort of framework, right? Like...
Oh, yeah. So I think the nature of R&D, by which I mean like totally speculative development, you don't know if it has an outcome or not. Like this talk is very much about release process and ship process. You don't put R&D into a release, all right? You do not commit something until you actually know that it's possible. So I think R&D is sort of a priori, and that said, I think, and so I'd have to sort of think about, does this apply to R&D? I think, or does it have lessons for how you pursue R&D? I think it probably does. My bias is that research in a vacuum, that feedback helps you, right? That if you're trying to invent something new, whether that's a new product concept or a new technology, that tight feedback loops help you prune the search space more quickly and help you sort of find your way to the best answer more quickly. But, ultimately, I think you have to have the discipline not to put things that are not known to be possible into a commitment anywhere. And
yeah, I think that's the main thing that we struggle with, because it's so easy to leverage our 200 million user base to go test out some new R&D idea.
yep.
And the thing that we can do there is like force people to think about like grow your own user base to help you test this experiment.
Gotcha. So experimentation on production users. Okay, so yes, so experiments do end up in the release vehicle. And I think that how much you experiment, I think, is shaped by the quadrants. And, you know, I think it was one thing, or maybe just is shaped, it's part of the cost of a mistake, right? It's part of your, I think, your I don't want to say the quadrants. I mean, I want to say your mission, your value system, what you're optimizing for, your priorities, your appetite for risk, your tolerance of mistakes does come into play when you're thinking about experimentation, because by definition, experiments are, you know, much more likely to result in mistakes. I mean, hopefully the impact of those mistakes is very limited because they're hitting a very small number of your users, and so you can be a little bit more cavalier about them. But, you know, Facebook had experimentation baked into everything that they did, and you know, it came to the point where we were experimenting so much that it wasn't a drop in a bucket anymore. It was sort of like you were fairly likely to be in some experiment or another over the course of 6 months of being a Facebook user. And I think, you know, if it's reached the point where it is user impacting, then you need to sort of take a step back and think hard about, okay, what's my bar? Like, is the value of this experiment? And I think you have to be grounded in a value system, and I will sort of toss out there, you know, I would suggest that your value system should be, are we accomplishing our mission of creating value for users? And if the importance of this experiment is such that it helps users more than its potential to hurt them, then go for it. And if it does not, like, let's think twice about using user experimentation to solve this problem. And, but it also, like, it sort of depends on the chance of the experiment to cause harm. I don't have a one true way. I think it's a trade-off conversation, and I think people need to approach them as trade-offs. But I don't think it's wrong to experiment on your 200 million users if you are net large positive. If experimentation lets you go much faster and deliver a much better feature, that is net positive for your user base, for your community.
Okay, so just to clarify that one, I'm not sure. It's probably our last question where we are at time, so I'm not sure if you can quickly answer this. But it was around just you talked about appealing to the larger value system at Facebook. It's really around how you resolved that conversation. So did you pick a better release system, or what was the resolution?
I mean, it was long and slow, and I would say sort of ongoing. I think there were some people who were, it was. Actually, you guys may have read the blog of a former Netscape product manager, Ben Horowitz, and he has a blog post I love, you know, which is from his set in his time at Netscape, which was a conversation about, you know, sometimes there is no silver bullet. It's just going to take a lot of lead bullets, and it was a lot of lead bullets, and some of it was very basic blocking and tackling on getting people actually to trust each other and respect each other and listen to each other. And some of that came from transferring people between teams. I took people from the mobile teams and transferred them into the product teams, which kind of forced them to, I mean, the people who were willing to transfer were people who were more prone to communicate anyway. But I think that created bonds of trust because the mobile team still trusted that guy even after he belonged to the product team, and then he could be a little bit of a communication bridge. So, you know, I think it's very social. I actually think it's very much like the human dynamics of communication. I think agreeing on values mattered. There were some tactical things. Like we got a beta program up and running, and that made a huge difference because now the product teams had a way to iterate without waiting 16 weeks. And, you know, and by the way, it turns out, like, if you want to talk about experimentation, you know, usually experimenting on users is not always good for them. Experimenting on beta users, and they love you more. So it's kind of a win-win. I think it's a great get-out-of-jail-free card. And so that was tremendous. Moving the release cycle from 4 weeks to 2 weeks, or rather from 8 weeks to 4 weeks, actually made an immense difference, right? So there were absolutely some tactical things, too. It wasn't all just sort of, you know, communication and soft skills. But, you know, are debates that rage today. I don't think it's ever perfect. And there were some hotheads who just left, who just didn't want to see the world any other way, through anybody's eyes but their own. And I think sometimes when people just don't want to come to the table and won't treat each other with trust and respect, then, I think you do have to part ways. But I think that's an extreme.
I think that's a wrap.
All right, well, thank you very much for inviting me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, we would have. Thanks so much, Jocelyn, and I really wish Yasha was here. Another little known fact about Jocelyn: she is a former Miata driver and a former RX-8 driver, and Yasha used to give me crap for saying that Mazda drivers were the best, but they are, and so. Thank you, thanks, Jocelyn, and I really appreciate it. Now we have a prize package for you, a Mozilla prize package. Yeah, I thought it was for me, but I was like, I already have a bag like this. But anyway, thank you so much for attending, and it'll all be on our Mozilla later.
Tune in next month, February 25th. Details to come.